What do you actually know about a medieval castle at night? You probably picture the great hall, torchlight, a roaring fire, a lord at the head of a long table with a cup of wine and a roasted boar in front of him, maybe a minstrel in the corner, laughter, dogs fighting over bones on the floor. That version exists, but it ends. At some point, every night, the hall empties, the fire drops, the torches gutter out one by one, and the castle, this enormous, cold stone machine built for war and power and survival, is left to the dark. And the dark in a medieval castle is something else entirely. There are no street lights, no electric hum, no distant traffic. When night falls on a castle in, say, the year 1250, it falls completely. The corridors become tunnels. The staircases become traps. The wind finds every gap in the masonry and speaks through it in ways that make perfectly rational people check over their shoulder. And yet, the castle does not sleep. There are people awake in it all night long. The night watchman making his rounds, the kitchen staff banking the fires, the soldiers on the battlements, cold and bored and scanning a darkness they cannot see into, the priest in the chapel, praying the night offices by candlelight, the Lord's household, turning in their sleep behind locked doors. Tonight, we are going to walk through all of it. We'll follow the castle from the moment the great hall empties after the evening meal, through the deep watches of the night, to the first grey light of dawn coming over the battlements. We'll meet the people you never read about in the history books, not the knights, not the lords, but the ones keeping the castle alive while everyone else is asleep. One castle, one night. The year is 1250. Let's step inside. The evening meal is ending. In a medieval castle of any significance, the great hall was the beating heart of daily life. A vast room, often 30 or 40 feet high, with a central hearth or a great fireplace at one end, long trestle tables running the length of the floor, and the Lord's table raised on a dais at the far end, where he could see everything and be seen. The meal itself, called supper, the lighter of the two main meals of the medieval day, has been underway since around 6 or 7 in the evening. By modern standards, it was not elaborate. Bread, perhaps a pottage of vegetables and grains, some salted meat or fish, depending on the day of the week and the season, wine or ale, a dish of preserved fruit if the castle was wealthy. The church prescribed fasting on Wednesdays, Fridays, and Saturdays. No meat, sometimes no dairy, and the medieval household largely obeyed, which meant that a significant portion of the year's suppers were quieter, plainer affairs than we might imagine. The Lord and his family ate at the high table. His household knights, stewards, and senior officials ate at the long tables below. At the very bottom of the hall, nearest the door, nearest the cold and the noise, sat the lower servants, the grooms, the kitchen boys, people whose place in the room announced their place in the world with no words needed. Now the meal is done. The Lord has risen, a signal to the entire room, and the hall begins to empty. Servants move quickly to clear the trestle tables, which are literally disassembled. The planks lifted from their supports, stacked against the walls. The hall transforms in minutes from a dining room into a sleeping space, because for most of the castle's servants, this is where they will sleep, on the rushes and straw covering the stone floor near the dying fire, wrapped in whatever they have. The dogs settle, the fire drops, the candles on the high table are snuffed. The night begins. Before we follow the night watchman on his rounds, let's stay here a moment in the great hall and look at what's actually on the floor. Rushes. The floors of medieval castle halls were covered in layers of rushes, dried marsh grass, mixed with herbs like lavender, mint, and meadowsweet to mask the smell of what accumulated beneath them. Because things did accumulate. Food scraps dropped from the tables. Dog waste. The general detritus of a room used by dozens or hundreds of people every day for months or years without the floor covering being fully replaced. The smell of a medieval great hall to a modern nose would have been extraordinary, not necessarily unbearable. The herbs did real work, and people's olfactory expectations were calibrated to a world without modern sanitation, but rich, earthy, animal, layered with wood smoke and the grease of cooking and the particular damp stone smell of old masonry. Into this now, the lower servants are settling to sleep. They lie close to each other for warmth. The great hall loses heat quickly once the fire is banked, and stone conducts cold mercilessly. They use their cloaks as blankets. Some have thin straw pallets they roll out. Most sleep directly on the rush-covered floor. The rats are already active. They are always active. Rats in a medieval castle were not an occasional nuisance. They were a permanent fact of life. They lived in the walls, in the stores, in the stables. They moved through the hall at night with complete confidence, because the hall was, in a real sense, partly their domain too. Castle dogs were partly kept for precisely this reason. A good ratter was as valuable as a good guard. The servants sleeping on the floor know this. They have always known this. They pull their cloaks tighter and close their eyes. Somewhere in the castle, a man is awake who would very much rather not be. The night watch was one of the least glamorous but most essential roles in a medieval castle. Every castle of any size maintained a rotating watch through the night. Men who walked the corridors, checked the gates, walked the walls, listened for anything that shouldn't be there. In times of peace, it was profoundly boring work. In times of conflict, it was the difference between a castle standing and a castle falling. Our watchman tonight is neither a knight nor a soldier of particular distinction. He is a man-at-arms, a professional soldier of the middling sort, armed with a short sword and a long staff, carrying a lantern that gives him perhaps 6 feet of useful light in any direction and announces his presence to anyone watching from the dark. He begins his round at the gatehouse. The main gate of a significant medieval castle was not a simple door. It was a system, a heavy wooden gate reinforced with iron, perhaps a portcullis, a latticed iron grille that could be dropped in seconds, a drawbridge over a moat or ditch, murder holes in the ceiling of the gate passage through which defenders could drop stones or pour unpleasant things on attackers, arrow loops in the walls on either side. At night, all of this is locked, barred, and chained. The watchman checks each element: the bar across the gate, the chain on the portcullis mechanism, the bridge, raised and secure. He knows every sound the gatehouse makes on a calm night. He has stood this watch dozens of times. The creak of the chain in wind, the particular way the gate settles in its frame when the temperature drops. Anything that doesn't sound like what it should sound like is worth investigating. Tonight, everything sounds as it should. He moves on. Here is something the romantic image of the medieval castle gets almost completely wrong. They were brutally cold. Stone is an excellent building material for durability, for defense, for fire resistance. It is a terrible material for thermal comfort. Stone absorbs cold and radiates it back with complete indifference to the people living inside it. The walls of a castle might be 8, 10, 12 feet thick, impressive as fortification, useless as insulation. In winter, the interior temperature of a castle could drop to just a few degrees above the outside air, because the stone had been cold for months and no reasonable amount of fire could warm it entirely. The castle's designers knew this, of course. The great hall had fireplaces, the lord's private chambers, the solar, the great chamber, the bedchamber had fireplaces. The chapel had braziers, but the corridors had nothing. The stairwells had nothing. The guard rooms at the top of the towers, where men stood watch for hours, had perhaps a small brazier that needed constant tending and still barely kept frostbite at bay. Medieval people layered clothing in a way we might find excessive today. The watchman walking the corridors tonight wears a wool under tunic, an outer tunic, a padded gambeson, the quilted jacket that soldiers wore under armor, and a heavy wool cloak on top of that. His feet are in leather boots with extra wool wrappings. His hands, when not holding the lantern, are tucked under the cloak. He is still cold. The corridors he walks are narrow, built not for comfort, but for defensibility. Stone stairs spiral clockwise, so that a right-handed defender coming down can swing freely while an attacker coming up is impeded by the central column. The ceilings are low. Doorways are small. Everything about the castle's interior is designed around the assumption that at some point someone might be trying to take it by force. The watchman has walked these corridors so many times he could do it without the lantern. Sometimes when the candle inside gutters and dims, he does. The watchman climbs to the battlements. Up here, everything changes. The enclosed, echoing world of stone corridors gives way to something vast and uncontained. The wind off the surrounding countryside is unobstructed at this height, and it is serious wind, the kind that finds the gaps in your clothing and works at them. The watchman pulls his cloak tighter and begins his walk around the parapet. The view from a castle battlement at night in the medieval period was not the view we can see today. There were no lights in the landscape. The villages that dotted the land around the castle were dark. Inside, perhaps, a few fires visible through shuttered windows, but from a battlement 200 feet up on a windy night, nothing. Just fields and forest, gradations of darkness, the occasional glint of a river catching moonlight if the moon was out. This is the watch that requires the most of a man. Down in the corridors, he is enclosed, directed, purposeful. Up here, he must scan an emptiness that offers nothing to focus on. His eyes play tricks. A stand of trees becomes a line of men. A moving cloud becomes something descending a hillside. The experienced watchman learns to see through this, to distinguish between the darkness that is simply dark and the darkness that is different in some way he cannot immediately name. He carries a horn. If something is wrong, he blows it, a sound that will wake the castle in seconds, that will bring armed men from their beds in a practiced rush. That means the elaborate machinery of castle defense comes to life in the dark. Tonight, the horn stays silent. He walks the full circuit of the battlements. The cold is serious now. He stamps his feet. He blows on his fingers. He checks the towers at each corner of the curtain wall. Each one has a soldier posted in it. Each one requires acknowledgement. A brief exchange of words to confirm that the man is awake and the sector clear. Below him, in the outer ward, the horses can be heard shifting in the stables. The castle breathes around him. He begins his descent. There is a room in this castle where the night never fully arrives. The castle chapel is small, perhaps 20 feet long, 12 wide. but it is never entirely dark. A single candle burns before the altar at all hours. The sanctuary lamp, its small, persistent flame indicating the presence of the consecrated host, the body of Christ reserved for the dying and the sick. In medieval theology, this was not a symbol. This was a fact. God was in this room in a specific and physical way, and the candle burning before him was an acknowledgement of that presence. The castle's chaplain is awake. The medieval church divided the night into a series of prayer offices. Canonical hours, they were called, that structured time itself around acts of worship. Compline, the last prayer of the evening, was said before sleep. Then matins, in the deep of the night, around 2 or 3 in the morning. Then lauds, at dawn. For a castle chaplain, this meant that the night was not a period of uninterrupted sleep, but a sequence of prayer. Sleep, prayer, sleep, prayer. He is a middle-aged man, tonsured, his head shaved in the distinctive circular pattern that marked a man in holy orders, wearing a simple wool habit over his night clothes because the chapel is cold even by castle standards, the stone floor radiating chill upward through his thin leather shoes. He kneels before the altar and opens his psalter. The Latin words come without effort. He has prayed these same words thousands of times at this same hour, in this same posture. The act requires less thought than breathing. And yet, there is something that happens in a dark chapel at 2 in the morning that doesn't happen anywhere else. The candle, the stone, the absolute silence beyond the walls, the sense of smallness, of being one kneeling figure in an indifferent universe, holding on to a thread of light. Whether this produces faith or doubt depends on the man. Perhaps both at once. He finishes the office. He bows. He returns to his small cell adjacent to the chapel and sleeps, knowing he will wake again before dawn. At the top of the tower, behind a locked and bolted door, the Lord is not sleeping. He should be. He will rise at dawn for the morning mass, and the day that follows will be full. Disputes to adjudge, correspondence to dictate, accounts to review, the endless administrative machinery of a great estate that required constant attention. His steward will be waiting for him before breakfast. His marshal has a question about the eastern pastures. There is a letter from the king that requires a careful reply, but the Lord is lying on his back in the dark, watching the shadows on the canopy of his bed, thinking. It is worth pausing here to consider what medieval lordship actually felt like from the inside. We tend to see it from the outside, the castle, the lands, the power. What we miss is the weight of it. A lord of any significance was responsible for the safety, the justice, and the material welfare of everyone within his authority, the castle household. the villages on his estates, the tenants who worked his land and brought their disputes to his court. He was, in the medieval understanding, a link in a chain that ran from God downward through the king to the lord to the peasant. The chain was supposed to transmit justice, order, and protection in one direction, and obedience and service in the other. When it worked, this was the medieval world functioning as intended. When it didn't, when the Lord was unjust or weak or simply absent, the consequences ran downward through everyone below him. He knows this. The good ones always knew this. His chamber is the warmest room in the castle. The fire has been laid well. The shutters are tight. The bed is curtained with heavy wool hangings that trap body heat. By the standards of his time, he sleeps in luxury. His wife is beside him, also not sleeping. They speak quietly, in the way married people speak in the dark, not formally, not for the record. The worries that don't get said in daylight get said now. Outside, the wind moves around the tower and finds nothing to hold on to. The kitchen never fully sleeps. In a castle of any size, the kitchen was a large separate building within the inner ward. Separate primarily because kitchens burned down and nobody wanted the kitchen fire to become the castle fire. It was built of stone with a high ceiling to draw the smoke. One or more enormous hearths capable of roasting whole animals on iron spits, stone counters, hanging racks of iron cookware, barrels of provisions, strings of dried herbs and onions from the rafters. The fires in these hearths were not extinguished at night. They were banked, reduced to deep, glowing beds of coals that could be brought back to full heat within minutes. Someone had to tend them. Someone had to make sure the coals didn't die, that a stray spark didn't catch a hanging cloth, that the water barrel kept for emergencies was full, that someone tonight is a kitchen boy, perhaps 12 years old. He did not choose this work. He was placed into it, as children of his class were placed into whatever work was available, as soon as they were old enough to be useful. He sleeps on a straw pallet in the corner of the kitchen, closer to the heat than anyone else in the castle, which is the one advantage of his position. He wakes every hour or two to check the coals, add a piece of wood, scan the room. He is too tired to be frightened of the dark. This is the mercy of exhaustion. Tomorrow, the kitchen will come to full life before dawn. The breakfast bread needs to go into the ovens while the castle is still asleep, so that it's ready when the household wakes. The kitchen boy knows this because he has never known anything different. He adds wood to the fire and goes back to sleep. The coals breathe. The kitchen watches itself. The horses are awake. Horses sleep in short intervals. Unlike humans, they can sleep standing up, entering a light doze while still on their feet, dropping into deeper sleep only briefly and only when they feel safe. In a castle stable at night, the horses are never entirely still. They shift weight, nose at their hay, communicate in small sounds that carry surprisingly far in the dark. The stables were one of the most important spaces in a medieval castle. Not romantically important, practically, economically, militarily important. A warhorse, a destrier, represented an investment equivalent to a modern luxury car, multiplied by several years of a working man's wages. The horses in a significant castle's stable were worth more than most of the buildings in the surrounding village. They were fed, groomed, exercised, and attended with a care that was not sentimental but rational. These animals were weapons, transport, and status all in one. The head groom sleeps in the stable, not because he has no other option, though some didn't, but because the horses were his responsibility and he took that seriously. He wakes several times through the night to check on them. A horse that has cast itself, rolled and become wedged against the stable wall, can injure itself fatally in minutes if nobody is there to notice. A horse running a fever, a horse that has gone off its water. He knows each animal's normal sounds, normal smells, normal behavior. Anything different registers immediately, even in sleep. He is up now, walking the stable aisle by the light of a shuttered lantern, running a hand along each animal's flank as he passes. The horses turn their great heads toward him. They know him. He knows them. Everything is fine tonight. He goes back to sleep. Not everyone on watch tonight is walking. In the guard rooms at the gates and towers, small groups of soldiers sit through the night hours doing what soldiers have always done when not actively fighting: waiting. They play dice. They tell the same stories they've told 100 times. They complain about the food, the cold, the pay. They fall asleep and are woken by the man next to them, because falling asleep on watch is a serious offense and nobody wants to face the consequences. But staying awake through the deep hours of the night is genuinely difficult, and the body insists on closing its eyes whether the mind agrees or not. These are not nights. The distinction matters enormously in the medieval world. Knights were the armored cavalry elite, sworn vassals of the Lord, men of at least minor noble birth, who had trained since childhood for mounted warfare. The men in this guardroom are soldiers of a lower class, paid professionals, or garrison troops drawn from the Lord's obligation to supply men to the king, or local men who had found that soldiering was a better living than farming. Their equipment reflects this: mail and padded armor rather than plate, spears and crossbows rather than the knight's lance and sword. They are competent and trained, and they know their jobs. They are also cold and tired, and would very much like it to be morning. The dice game is interrupted when one of them thinks he hears something on the outer wall. They go quiet and listen. Wind, the creak of the portcullis chain. A horse in the stable. Nothing. The dice game resumes. In the history of castle garrisons, this is what the vast majority of nights looked like. Not heroism, not drama. Boredom and cold and the slow, grinding discipline of maintaining readiness for an event that, on most nights, never came. Let's return to the Great Hall and look more carefully at who is sleeping here and who isn't. The medieval castle household was one of the most rigidly hierarchical institutions in a society that was itself rigidly hierarchical. Position determined everything. What you ate, where you sat, what you wore, where you slept, who spoke to you, and how. This hierarchy did not relax at night. It simply expressed itself differently. The Lord and his family slept in the private apartments in the tower, the solar and the great chamber, rooms that existed specifically to provide withdrawal from the communal life of the hall. Access to privacy was a mark of status. The higher you were, the more walls you had between yourself and other people. Below the Lord, his senior officials had their own small rooms. The steward, the marshal, the chamberlain. These rooms were cold and barely furnished, but they were rooms. The door was the thing. A door you could close was a marker of having arrived somewhere in life. The household knights slept in a dormitory-style space, several together, which was still several grades above the Great Hall. And in the Great Hall itself, the gradations continued. The senior servants, the head cook, the head groom, the butler, occupied the spaces nearest the dying fire. The junior servants lay further out. The kitchen boys and stable lads were furthest from the fire, nearest the door, in the coldest air. Nobody chose this arrangement. It simply was. The way winter was. The way stone was. The people at the bottom of the hall had been born into a world where this was the order of things, and most of them would die without ever having slept in a room with a door. Some of them, in the depth of sleep, pulled their cloaks up against the cold and dreamed of warmth. Deep in the castle, in rooms without windows, someone is counting. The pantler, the officer responsible for the bread and the dry stores, is awake late, working by candlelight on the accounts that determine whether the castle can survive the winter. This is not a metaphor. The stores he is counting could mean the difference between the household eating in February and not eating in February. A large medieval castle maintained enormous quantities of food in storage. Grain, wheat for fine bread, rye and barley for coarser loaves and ale, stored in large stone chambers designed to keep it dry and cool. Dried and salted meat, barrels of salted fish, honey which keeps indefinitely, and was the primary sweetener of the medieval world. Dried beans and peas, hard cheese packed in salt, barrels of wine and ale. All of this was locked. All of it was counted, logged, and jealously guarded. Theft from the Lord's stores was a serious offense, and the pantler knew that if the accounts didn't balance, the shortfall would be attributed to him first and investigated second. He also knew something more existential. A castle under siege was only as strong as its stores. The entire strategic logic of castle defense rested on the ability to hold out, to wait behind walls until a relief force arrived, until the besieging army ran out of money or food or will. A castle with 6 months of stores was a different proposition from one with 6 weeks. He makes his notations carefully. He checks a column of numbers twice. He notes that the saltfish is running lower than it should be at this point in winter. He will speak to the steward in the morning. He closes the ledger, locks the storeroom behind him, and goes to bed. The candle goes out. Not everyone in the castle is merely asleep. In a small room off the great hall, one of the senior servants is ill. Not gravely, a winter fever, the kind that comes every year with the cold and the damp, but ill enough that his wife has been awake beside him for 3 nights, changing the cloth on his forehead, monitoring his breathing, praying when the breathing sounds wrong. Medieval medicine was not nothing, but it operated from entirely different premises than our own. The dominant framework was humoral theory, inherited from the ancient Greeks, which held that the body was governed by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Health was their balance. Illness was their imbalance. Treatment, therefore, was about restoration, bloodletting to reduce an excess of blood, purging to clear bile, dietary adjustments to shift the balance. A castle of any size had access to a physician, either a resident one if the lord was wealthy enough, or a local practitioner who could be summoned. The physician's toolkit included herbs, both those grown in the castle's own physic garden and those traded from further afield. Willow bark tea, which we now know contained aspirin's active ingredient for fever. Honey as an antimicrobial wound dressing centuries before anyone understood why it worked. Lavender for anxiety, valerian for sleep. The woman tending her husband tonight has her own knowledge, separate from the physician's. Women's medical knowledge in the medieval period was extensive, practical, and largely oral, passed from mother to daughter, shared between neighbors, accumulated over generations of watching what worked and what didn't. She has already given him the willow bark tea. She has changed his position twice to ease his breathing. She is not panicking. She has seen worse than this. She is just awake and watching and waiting for the fever to break. The way people have always waited beside the sick in the dark. Toward morning, it breaks. She lets out a breath she has been holding for 3 days. There is an hour in the middle of the night. The medieval world called it the midwatch, or simply the dead of night, when something shifts. What to describe precisely? The night is at its coldest. The fires are at their lowest. Even the people who are supposed to be awake are fighting hardest against sleep. The castle feels more empty than it is, more still than it is, as if the stone itself has absorbed the silence and is giving it back. As is sometimes claimed, ignorant of the natural world around them, they understood the rhythms of night and day with an intimacy that most modern people have lost. They knew this hour, the dead watch, the time when the darkness seems most permanent. Monks dreaded it because matins required them to be awake precisely now, and the body resisted this with everything it had. They also feared it in ways both rational and irrational. The rational fears were real enough. Fire was a constant threat, a dropped candle in a storeroom, a spark from a banked hearth catching a rush mat. In the deep of the night, with everyone asleep, a fire that wasn't discovered within minutes could become catastrophic. This is why the watch mattered. This is why the kitchen boy woke to check the coals. But the irrational fears were also real, in the sense that they were genuinely felt. The medieval night was populated in the imagination with things that did not exist in daylight. Not monsters exactly. The medieval mind was more sophisticated than that. But presences. The souls of the recently dead, not yet at rest. Demons who moved more freely in darkness than in light. The particular species of night terror that medieval physicians called incubus, a suffocating weight on the sleeping chest that we now understand as sleep paralysis. The watchman, completing his third round of the night, knows about all of this. He is a practical man who does not consider himself superstitious, but he moves through the corridor outside the chapel a little faster than he needs to, and does not look too long at the shadows at the end of the passage. He is not afraid. He simply prefers not to look. In the center of the inner ward, there is a well. Every castle needed a reliable water source within its walls. Without one, a siege could be ended simply by waiting. The castle well was therefore one of the most carefully maintained and defended elements of the entire structure. In some castles, it was housed within the keep itself, drilled through bedrock at enormous labor and expense. In others, it sat in the inner ward, covered and locked, because a poisoned well ended a castle faster than a battering ram. The water from a castle well in 1250 was not clean by modern standards. Medieval people did not understand germ theory. That would not come for another 600 years. But they had learned through hard observation that water from certain sources made people sick and water from others did not. Well, Water was generally preferable to surface water, which was understood to be associated with illness even if the mechanism was not. Ale was preferred to water for daily drinking, partly for the calories and partly because the brewing process, which involves boiling, inadvertently killed pathogens. At night, the well is locked and covered. Nobody comes here now, but the water below is still moving. A slow, cold, underground seep that has been filling this hole for as long as the castle has stood. In the darkness beneath the well cover, 10 feet down and then 30, the water is silent and absolute. Things fall into wells, objects, animals, occasionally people. The castle's records, if they survive, might mention the well being cleaned out, a grim job done by the smallest available person lowered on a rope into the cold dark to bring up whatever had accumulated. The watchman passes the well without stopping. He has passed it 1,000 times. He does not think about what is beneath it. He moves on. We should talk about what is below the castle. Not every castle had a dungeon in the Hollywood sense. A purpose-built torture chamber dripping with chains and malice. The word itself comes from the French donjon, meaning simply the great tower, the keep, the strongest part of the castle, which was where important prisoners were held precisely because it was the hardest to escape from. But castles did hold prisoners. This was partly their function. The Lord exercised high justice over his territory, the power of life, death, and imprisonment. Criminals, debtors, political enemies, ransomable prisoners of war, all of these could end up in the castle's keeping. Where they were kept depended on their status. A noble prisoner of war might be held in reasonable comfort in a tower room. He was valuable, and mistreating him could complicate the ransom negotiation. A common criminal awaiting trial might be held in a far less comfortable pit, the oubliette, a vertical shaft with a hole at the top through which a prisoner was lowered and from which they could not climb out, was real, though perhaps less common than fiction suggests. The name comes from the French oublier, to forget. A prisoner placed in an oubliette was being forgotten, deliberately, permanently. Tonight, there may or may not be a prisoner somewhere in the castle's lower reaches. If there is, they are in darkness. No light is wasted on prisoners. They are cold, because the lower levels of a castle are colder than the upper, being further from fires and closer to the earth. They are listening to the same sounds the watchman is hearing above them, translated through stone. The watchman's route does not take him past the cells tonight. He does not think about what is below him as he walks, but something perhaps thinks about him. We need to step outside the castle for a moment, to the ground just beyond the outer wall, because the castle did not exist in isolation. It sat in a landscape of people, The tenants of the surrounding estates, the villagers, the travelling poor, the sick, the pilgrim, the dispossessed, and at the gate of a significant medieval castle, especially one connected to a religious establishment or a generous lord, there was an expectation. The almoner was the officer responsible for the castle's charitable giving. Every day, or as close to every day as the castle's resources allowed, leftover food from the great hall's tables was distributed at the gate to the poor who gathered there. Bread, pottage, the bones from the meat dishes, the heels of the ale barrels. Not generous portions, but something. The theological obligation of charity to the poor was not an abstraction in the medieval world. It was a practical, daily, physically enacted duty. At night, the gate is shut and the almoner is asleep, but the people outside are not necessarily. The medieval poor had no indoor alternatives. The hedgerow, the ditch, the church porch, the slight shelter of the castle's outer wall on the leeward side. These were the options for people with nowhere else to be. The castle that loomed above them was warm, supplied, defended. They were cold, hungry, and entirely at the mercy of the weather. Medieval people thought about the poor in ways that were both more direct and more complicated than we might expect. The church taught that the poor were spiritually privileged, that poverty was a holy state, that Christ himself had been poor, that giving to the poor was giving to Christ directly, and simultaneously the church and secular law were filled with anxious legislation about vagabonds, sturdy beggars, the undeserving poor. The people outside the gate tonight are simply cold. Whether deserving or undeserving, they are cold. The castle wall gives them a little shelter from the wind. That is all it gives them tonight. The chaplain has woken for matins. The canonical hours, the structured prayers that divided the medieval day and night into acts of worship, are one of the great organizing principles of the medieval world. Even outside monasteries, even in secular institutions like castles, the rhythm of the hours shaped daily life. Church bells, where they existed, marked the offices. The castle's day was built around them. Matins was the night office, the longest and most demanding of the canonical hours, said deep in the night when the body most resisted waking. In monasteries, the monks would process to the choir in darkness, their way lit by a single candle. The service itself, in its fullest form, could last 2 hours. The castle chaplain does not have monks to process with. He has his psalter, his altar, his candle, and God. He begins the Psalms of Matins. The Latin moves through the cold chapel and returns from the stone walls in a slight echo that is not quite an accompaniment. Deus in adjutorium meum intende. O God, come to my assistance. Domine ad adjuvandum me festina. O Lord, make haste to help me. The words are almost incomprehensible with familiarity by now. He has said them so many times that they operate at a level below thought, a practiced descent into something he cannot fully articulate and does not try to. Prayer, for the medieval clergyman, was not primarily about achieving insight or emotional experience. It was about obedience, showing up in the dark and saying the words, regardless of how you felt, regardless of whether the dark felt populated or empty. The candle flame moves without apparent cause. The chaplain does not look up. He finishes the office. He bows to the altar. He returns to his cell and wraps himself in his blanket and lies down. Outside, the night continues. On the upper floor of the residential tower, in a room adjacent to the Lord and Lady's chamber, the children are asleep. Children in medieval noble households occupied a peculiar position, simultaneously precious and instrumental. They were loved. The evidence from chronicles, letters, and the lavish attention paid to children's objects and toys makes this clear. And they were also pieces in a larger game of dynastic alliance, inheritance, and obligation. The Lord's eldest son, perhaps 7 or 8 years old, would soon begin the process that would consume his next decade, being sent to another lord's household as a page to begin his training in the arts of knighthood. This was not abandonment. It was how noble boys became noble men. You learned service by performing it, learned lordship by watching it, learned war by training for it from the moment you could hold a wooden sword. His younger sister, perhaps 5, lay beside a nursemaid in the same room. Her future was already being discussed between her parents and their allies in terms of marriage. Who might be available? What alliance might be advantageous? How many years until she was old enough to be betrothed, if not yet wed? This was not cynical. It was the world she had been born into, and it would shape everything about her life. For now, though, they are simply children. They sleep the absolute sleep of the young, tangled in their blankets, entirely unaware of the night watchman passing in the corridor below, the chaplain finishing his prayers, the soldiers playing dice in the gatehouse. The Lord listens to them breathe sometimes, in the deep of the night, when he cannot sleep. Through the stone, it is the one thing that quiets him. It is worth stopping here to speak of what everyone in this castle was afraid of. Not siege engines, not assassins, not the political machinations of rival lords. Fire. Fire was the catastrophic risk of the medieval built environment, and the castle was not exempt from it despite being built of stone. The stone walls would survive. The contents would not. The wooden floors, the roof timbers, the furniture, the tapestries, the stores, the stables, all of it was combustible. A fire that caught in the great hall while everyone slept could kill most of the household before the watch could respond. This is not a theoretical fear. Castle fires were common. Chronicles are full of them. A candle left unattended, a hearth spark catching a rush mat, an overloaded kitchen fire that got away from the boy tending it. Sometimes the structure itself survived, and only the contents were lost. Sometimes the roof collapsed and took the floors with it. The castle had precautions, water barrels stationed at intervals through the main buildings, the watch specifically tasked with checking for smoke, the kitchen built separate from the hall, the hearths lined with stone, the strict prohibition on open flames in the storerooms. But precautions are not guarantees, and everyone who slept in a medieval castle understood, at some level they perhaps didn't fully articulate, that the warmth keeping them alive was also the thing most capable of killing them. The kitchen boy wakes again and checks the coals. The watchman pauses in the corridor and sniffs the air. The Lord, lying awake, listens. No smoke. Not tonight. The castle breathes in and out. Sometime around 4 in the morning, in the deep dark before any grey appears in the sky, the castle begins to wake. Not loudly, not all at once, the way a large organism begins to register morning, a twitch here, a shift there, something changing in the rhythm of breathing. The kitchen boy is up and building the fires to full roar, because the bread ovens need to reach temperature before dawn, and there is no flexibility in this deadline. The household will want fresh bread at breakfast, and fresh bread requires an oven that has been hot for at least 2 hours. He works quickly, his movements automatic, his mind not yet fully engaged with the day. In the stables, the head groom is beginning the morning feeding. The horses know this routine with the precision of a military operation. They become restless just before he arrives, as if they can hear him coming from further away than seems possible, or sense the approaching hour with some faculty humans don't have. By the time he walks the aisle with the first armful of hay, each horse is already alert, watching him with the focused attention of creatures whose whole world is about to improve briefly. The night watchman completes what he knows is his last full round. There is a particular way the darkness changes in the last hour before dawn. Not lighter, not yet, but somehow less heavy, as if the sky on the other side of the horizon has begun to consider the possibility of morning. He has learned to read this after months of night watches. An hour, maybe less. He is very, very tired. In the chapel, the chaplain is at Lauds. Lauds, from the Latin laudare, to praise, was the dawn office, the prayer that greeted the returning light. In the structure of the canonical hours, it was the counterpart to Compline, where Compline commended the soul to God as the night began. Lauds praised God for the gift of the new day. The chaplain has been here before dawn hundreds of times. He knows the moment, watches for it every morning, when the candle's light on the stone wall begins to compete with something else. A greyness at the window, barely perceptible at first, more imagined than seen, then real. The Psalms of Lords include some of the most luminous poetry in the Hebrew Bible, written specifically for this threshold moment. Psalm 63. O God, you are my God. I seek you. My soul thirsts for you. My flesh faints for you, as in a dry and weary land where there is no water. The imagery of thirst and dawn and desire running together in a way that makes the text feel written for exactly this cold chapel, exactly this candle, exactly this moment when darkness is deciding whether to yield. The grey at the window deepens almost imperceptibly. The chaplain finishes Lord's and remains kneeling for a moment, not because the liturgy requires it, but because something in him is not ready to move yet. The transition from night to day in this room, at this hour, feels like a small miracle every single morning. Not a metaphor, an actual occurrence. The light, which was not there, is now there. He crosses himself. He rises. He blows out the altar candle, because now there is enough light without it. He steps outside into the inner ward. The sky is dark blue, and the stars are still out, but very faintly, as if they know their time is almost up. His breath makes a cloud in the cold air. The castle around him is beginning to produce sounds. The kitchen smoke rising. The horses audible from the stables. A door somewhere opening and closing. Morning is coming. The sun is not yet up, but the sky is pale enough now, on the eastern horizon, that the gatehouse captain has made his decision. Opening the castle gates was not done casually. Even in peacetime, the gates were not opened before it was genuinely light enough to see who was outside and what they were doing. The minute between too dark to see and light enough to proceed was a matter of judgment, and the gatehouse captain made that judgment every morning. Now the portcullis is raised, the chain running through the mechanism with a sound like a slow exhale, the iron grille rising foot by foot, the space beneath it growing. The gate itself follows, the bar lifted, the hinges groaning, the two great leaves swinging outward. Cold air floods the gate passage. The smell of the outside, fields, frost, the particular clean smell of winter morning, pushes into the warm, human-smelling interior of the castle. The transition is immediate and total. Outside the gate, the people who slept against the wall are already awake. They have been awake for some time, because the cold and discomfort of sleeping outside in winter mean that you are never deeply asleep. You surface constantly, check the sky, settle back. They see the gate opening and begin to stir, gathering their thin bundles, moving toward the possibility of warmth and food. The watchman, finishing his last round, passes through the gate into the outer ward and stands for a moment in the early morning air. He looks east, where the sky above the tree line is deepening from grey to pale gold. His watch is over. He has one thought, simple and complete. He is going to sleep. The castle is awake. The morning mass in the chapel, attended by the Lord and his household, a daily obligation taken seriously in a world where religious observance was not a private choice, but a public, communal act, draws the household together for the first time since last night's supper. The chaplain, who has been awake since before matins, now performs the most important act of his day with the particular lucid calm of the sleep-deprived. He has done this so many times that exhaustion does not interfere with the liturgy. The words carry him. The Lord stands at the front of the chapel, his wife beside him, his household behind him, ranked by position. The children, serious for once, standing still. After Mass, the household disperses to its morning work with the efficiency of long habit. The steward is already in conference with the pantler about the salt fish situation. The marshal is inspecting the horses. The kitchen is producing the smells that will draw everyone toward breakfast. The night watchman, finally released, is asleep in his small room off the guardhouse before the Mass is finished. He sleeps with the depth of a man who has earned it. A flat, dreamless sleep that will last until mid-morning. The kitchen boy, who has been awake since before midnight, is also asleep, slumped against a warm section of the kitchen wall, not having made it as far as his pallet. Nobody wakes him. He will sleep for an hour and then be shaken back into the day. This is his life. The castle goes on. The night is over. The castle is a different place in daylight. Louder, more purposeful, less strange. The corridors that felt like tunnels are just corridors. The shadows that moved are just shadows. The stone is still cold, but the fires are high, and the cold is a fact rather than a presence. But I want you to hold on to what you saw last night, because it tells you something important. The medieval castle, in the popular imagination, is a daytime place. It's the great hall, the tournament, the Lord in his solar receiving ambassadors, the knight riding out. These things happened. They mattered. But the night, the long, cold, dark, mostly unwatched night, is where the castle really showed what it was made of. Not its military strength, its human density. The kitchen boy waking to check the coals, the groom sleeping beside his horses, The chaplain alone in the chapel at 2 in the morning, saying words to the dark. The woman watching her husband's fever, waiting for the break she could not be certain would come. These people are not in the history books. We don't know their names. They left no letters, no chronicles, no monuments. The stone they lived inside outlasted them by centuries and still stands in some cases today, cold, enduring, indifferent. The walls remember nothing, but they were here. They kept the fire. They kept the watch. They prayed in the dark and baked the bread and tended the horses and got up again the next morning and did it all over again. The castle, the symbol of medieval power, the monument to feudal authority, ran on their labor, their wakefulness, their small, unglamorous acts of maintenance performed in the dark when everyone else was asleep. The light came up over the battlements. The gate opened. The day began. It always began.